وين هي الدولة اللبنانية ترد؟ وين هي؟
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Lebanese Army Commander General Jean Ahwaji urges troops to enforce a zero-tolerance policy for violent acts around the country. U.S. President Barack Obama decides to boost military support to the main Syrian rebel group. And millions of voters across Iran begin to cast their ballots in the country's presidential elections. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri has lamented Hezbollah's fighting in Syria, which he says has ruined the fraternal ties among the Lebanese people. Addressing the Lebanese people, he said Lebanon needs the word of truth, will halt the Iranian wars against the Lebanese people and their land, and will help liberate Lebanon from the illegitimate weapons and the hegemony of armed groups. He added Lebanon is inching closer towards an existential threat, which is jeopardizing the country's culture and sectarian diversity. The former premier warned Hezbollah is leading the country towards a dangerous phase, which none of the sects could avoid. He said Hezbollah is an extension of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and it is seeking to spearhead its agenda in the region. This agenda, he said, requires the Shiites in Lebanon to become the fuel of an endless war. Lebanese Army Commander General Jean Ahwaji urges troops to enforce a zero-tolerance policy for violent acts around the country. The national news agency said Ahwaji also urged troops to intervene immediately to resolve any dispute and arrest the perpetrators. His remarks came during a meeting with senior officers and field commanders at the Defense Ministry in Yerzeh. Tensions in Lebanon are mounting over increasing violence in the north and east of the country that is linked to the Syrian civil war. Prominent leaders of the Syndicate Coordination Committee, a coalition of private and public school teachers and public sector employees, have confirmed that a wage scale has been referred to the Parliament for adoption. In remarks to radio stations, SEC head Hanna Gharib and the president of the Private School Teachers Association, Nami Mahfoud, said the scale, which was endorsed by the government in March following weeks of protests across Lebanon, was referred to Parliament after President Michel Suleiman signed the decree. The signature took time after Suleiman's advisors found accounting mistakes in the scale and returned the draft law to Finance Minister Mohammad Safadi to amend it. The move prompted public teachers to threaten a boycott of official exam corrections if the salary scale was not referred to the Parliament by June the 22nd. Social Affairs Minister Wael Abu Fahour and U.S. Ambassador Mara Connelly have tackled the impact of the Syrian crisis on Lebanon and the refugees' influx burden on the country. Abu Fahour said that the situation was deteriorating on economic, social and security levels and stressed Lebanon's incapability to tolerate further loads. On another note, Connolly has reiterated that the Constitutional Council's failure to meet without the interference of Lebanon's political leaders undermines the confidence of international community in the country. The Constitutional Council failed to reach a quorum of members this week to rule on a court challenge of a new law that extends Parliament's term and delays elections until November 2014. The Council's session has been rescheduled for Tuesday after the boycott of the sessions by 3 Druze and Shiite Council members. The United States is boosting military support to the main Syrian rebel group after determining that the government has used chemical weapons against the opposition. This is according to a top White House official who said President Barack Obama decided to provide direct support to the Supreme Military Council, including military support.
Our intelligence community assesses that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons, including the nerve agent sarin, on a small scale against the opposition multiple times in the last year. Our intelligence community has a high confidence in that assessment, given the multiple independent streams of information associated with their reporting. The use of chemical weapons violates international norms and crosses red lines that have existed in the international community for decades. I'd also note that we believe that the Assad regime maintains control of chemical weapons within Syria, and we have not seen any reliable reporting or corroborated reporting indicating that the opposition has acquired or used chemical weapons. The President has made a decision about providing more support to the opposition. That will involve providing direct support to the SMC. That includes military support. I cannot detail for you all of the types of that support for a variety of reasons. But again, suffice to say, this is going to be different in both scope and scale in terms of what we are providing to the SMC than what we have provided before.
NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has welcomed a clear U.S. statement accusing the Syrian regime of using chemical weapons and says Damascus must let the UN investigate the allegations. He said the international community had made clear that the use of chemical weapons by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was completely unacceptable and a breach of international law.
This is indeed a matter of great concern. The international community has made clear that any use of chemical weapons is completely unacceptable and a clear breach of international law. I welcome the clear US statement. It is urgent that the Syrian regime should grant access to the United Nations to investigate all the reports of chemical weapons use. I still believe that the right way forward is a political solution. In that respect, I welcome the joint American-Russian initiative to call an international conference, and I urge all parties involved, the government and the opposition in Syria, to attend that conference and hopefully pave the way for a long-term sustainable political solution, and urge all parties to stop the bloodshed immediately.
Russia says the data provided by the United States on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons is unconvincing and warned that direct military aid to rebels will hurt peace efforts. This comes after President Vladimir Putin's top foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov said U.S. officials had recently presented Russia with new information about Assad's alleged chemical weapons use. Ushakov said the chances of holding a Syrian peace conference that Russia and the U.S. jointly proposed will be hurt by U.S. President Barack Obama's decision to provide military support for the opposition. For its part, Syria slammed Washington's claim that it has used chemical weapons in its fighting against rebels, accusing the U.S. of diffusing lies based on fabricated information. Well, coming up next, U.S. officials unveil the 400-page diary of Alfred Rosenberg, a top aide to Adolf Hitler. Stay with us for more. Welcome back. 2 cars were set ablaze and graffiti was sprayed on a wall in East Jerusalem in an apparent attack by hardline Israeli settlers against Palestinian residents. The incident had the hallmark of a so-called price tag attack, a term used by militant Israeli settlers who say they will exact a price for Palestinian attacks or any attempts by the Israeli government to curb settlement activity. Graffiti sprayed in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah read in Hebrew, "Revenge, price tag, Hawara." Police spokesman Mickey Rosenfeld said the 2 vehicles were burned in the neighbor's car park, adding that police were examining evidence and searching for suspects. Price tag attacks have targeted churches and monasteries, as well as Palestinian mosques and homes and Israeli military installations in the West Bank. Protesters occupying Ankara's Kugulu Park have refused to leave amid calls from the police. Protesters who set up tents in Kugulu Park of Ankara to show support to the protests in Istanbul's Gezi Park removed their tents after police warned them but remained in the park. In Istanbul's Gezi Park, protesters vowed to stay despite a promise by Erdogan that he will abide by a court decision on plans to redevelop the park. Turkish protesters said Erdogan had pledged not to push ahead with plans to redevelop an Istanbul park until a court ruled on the project in what they herald as a positive sign after 2 weeks of protest. Erdogan met a delegation overnight mostly made up of actors and artists, but also including 2 members of the umbrella protest group Taksim Solidarity, hours of saying his patience had run out and warning protesters occupying Gezi Park to leave. Millions of voters across Iran have begun to cast their ballots in the country's presidential elections 4 years after the disputed re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Interior Minister Mustafa Mohammad Najad told the Fars news agency, however, that the voting hours had been extended because of a rush of voters. It is unclear when the polls will now close. Polling stations opened at 8 a.m. this morning, and sources say voting could be extended until midnight. At the same time as choosing a new president from 6 candidates, voters will also pick municipal councillors. The first results are expected late tonight or early Saturday. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who called for a large turnout but did not publicly state his preference for any single candidate, cast his ballot in the capital of Tehran early today. Presidential candidate and moderate Muslim leader Hassan Rouhani has also cast his ballot in the capital. European Union trade ministers have arrived in Luxembourg for a meeting aimed at overcoming French resistance to free trade talks with the United States and keep alive plans for a deal that could boost economic recovery and create jobs in increasing transatlantic business. Paris, which is trying to shield French language culture from the global night of Hollywood and Silicon Valley, has refused to join the 26 other EU governments that want talks to restart in July unless television, movies and developing online media are left out of any deal. The EU needs French agreement not just because it is Europe's second largest economy, but because under EU rules, trade deals touching on cultural issues need unanimous support. Free trade advocates such as Germany and Britain say it is vital to push ahead with what should be the world's biggest trade agreement because of the economic benefits it will bring. And now for news around the world in brief, Europe's newest passenger jet, the A350, takes to the skies above Toulouse after 8 years of development worth $15 billion. The aircraft was designed to close a gap with Boeing in the battle for a new generation of lightweight, carbon composite jets. Watched by over 10,000 employees and spectators, the sleeked jet took off from Airbus's Toulouse plant with a crew of 6 and tons of test equipment on board. The flight, with 2 British and French former fighter pilots at the controls, was expected to last 4 hours. A passenger ferry has sunk in the central Philippine seas, killing 1 while rescuers are scrambling to save dozens more. The Coast Guard said the MV Lady of Mount Carmel sank en route to Masbate Island 3 hours after it left Albay province in Bicol region. The source said the ferry is completely underwater off the coast of Brias Island. The fatality is a 50-year-old woman found floating at sea not wearing a life jacket. U.S. officials have unveiled the 400-page diary of Alfred Rosenberg, a top aide to Adolf Hitler, who oversaw the genocide against Jews and others during World War II. The diary disappeared after Nuremberg trials in 1946, sparking a nearly 70-year hunt that ended on April the 5th in the upstate New York town of Lewiston, at the home of an academic named Herbert Richardson. The diary pages offers a broader look at the Third Reich's policy and practices, as well as an unvarnished account of a Nazi leader's thoughts. A theatrical adaptation of Palestinian activist and writer Ghassan Kanafani's famous novel Returning to Haifa is being performed at Babel Theatre in Hamra, Beirut. The play is a tribute to the author, whose work many say remains relevant today, more than 4 decades after his killing. The novel explores how Palestinian refugees perceive the meaning of homeland and how their understanding of it clashes with the past and present. Returning to Haifa tells the story of a Palestinian couple who were forced to leave their home in Haifa during the 1948 war. 20 years later, they returned to what used to be their hometown to search for their lost son, Khaldun. Director of the play, Lina Abyad, says the Palestinian issue is not solely the main topic of the play, because the story also addresses what a homeland represents. Annie Kanafani's Danish wife and chair of a foundation in his name says Kanafani's returning to Haifa has a meaning that deeply resonates in today's Arab world.
Well, I think the play which Ghassan Kanafani wrote in 1968, and it was published in 69, 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, it is actually as important today as it was when he wrote it. And I think it has a very important message, that we should never give up. And there is a future, but we have to fight for the future.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now here's a recap of our top stories. Lebanese Army Commander General Jean Ahwaji urges troops to enforce a zero-tolerance policy for violent acts around the country. U.S. President Barack Obama decides to boost military support to the main Syrian rebel group. And finally, millions of voters across Iran begin to cast their ballots in the country's presidential elections. Those are today's headlines for Future Television. Live from Beirut, I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you a very nice weekend.
وين هي الدولة اللبنانية ترد؟ وين هي؟